Okay. Lizzie, if you want to hit record. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, May 20th, and this is session B of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues hosting public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. My name is Seth Reisman, Deputy Director of Design Review at the Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For the record, commissioners present are Commissioner Love, Commissioner Sykes, Commissioner Kotorides, and Commissioner Lubinow. Tonight's agenda will include presentations for projects at 250 Bay State Road in the Fenway, aka Boston University Pardee School of Global Studies, and 181 to 185 West First Street in South Boston. Tonight's meeting proceedings will follow the typical BCDC subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, comments from BCDC commissioners, and public testimony. So turning to our first project at the Pardee School, a proposed project seeking Article 80B entitlement contemplates the development of approximately 70,000 square feet of primarily academic uses and 50,000 square feet of new open space in a single 12-story building on an approximately 1.3 acre site, consistent with an approved IMP previously reviewed and recommended for approval by this commission. This will be the second presentation of the project to the commission following its introduction at the April 1st monthly meeting. A reminder to the proponent team that presenters will be limited to 15 minutes. I will give you a halftime and 1 minute warning. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready.
Thank you, Seth. Let me start my share screen. Okay. Seth, you can see my screen? Terrific.
Yes. We can.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to present and continue to work on the Pardee School of Global Studies with you all. Just as a quick reminder, as you said, the site for the Pardee School of Global Studies is in the middle of BU's campus on an existing parking lot behind the CAS building itself and along the Charles River. Last time we presented and we spoke, we talked about the project in the kind of broad sense and the aspirations of the project. And what we heard was to come back today and start to talk a little bit more in detail about the landscape design and the technical development of the landscape in the public space, to talk about the ground floor plan and its development and its relationship to the public space on the exterior. Talk a little bit more about the building accessibility as an overall approach, as well as the development of the facade and the exterior enclosure that celebrates the timber structure and the collaboration that's happening in the Pardee School of Global Studies. So want to go through those items today. And since this is about landscape in the beginning, I'm going to hand it off to Chris to talk about the landscape, because I'm just an architect and you don't want me talking about landscape. So Chris, if you can go ahead.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you, commissioners. Just to start, but with a reminder of what the site looks like today. It's nice to start here because I think anything we do would be a dramatic improvement on the existing parking lot in the heart of an urban campus. If you flip to the next slide, the plan that we have here today is, I think, similar structurally to what you saw during the full committee. It's a landscape that pulls from the typologies of the Charles River Esplanade and some of the landscape qualities there. A landscape that provides an acre of open green space with some ecological and sustainable values embodied in the design and the qualities of it, and one that leverages the fantastic view shed of BU Beach, which is immediately adjacent to it. Go ahead. When we met with you at full committee, we basically heard two types of feedback from you. For the vast majority of the site, you asked us for a little bit more information, clarifying scale, materiality, program, adjacency of lots of the landscape rooms that we were describing for all of the areas highlighted in yellow. But you also asked us for some additional study, especially around where our site meets where pedestrian realm and vehicular realm meet, where our site meets Bay State Road. So let's start with the latter, and look at where we were last time and where we are today. In the previous plan, that intersection between pedestrian and vehicular realm was a little bit ambiguous and maybe a bit too porous. The open plaza suggested an openness for those two realms to coincide in a way that wasn't exactly the safest solution. And it invited some inadvertent pedestrian crossing through an active vehicular zone. That there was also an existing conflict between the existing geometry of the turnaround and that crosswalk. Through some additional planting that we've added in the current plan, that helps to hold that corner, provide a little bit more shade, provide, a little bit more benefit of just planting that holds space. We've created a new desire line that redirects that pedestrian traffic in a more perpendicular way across Bay State Road, but it also helps to realign that desire line down Bay State Road, to remove that crosswalk from the intersection or that conflict with the existing circle, helping to clarify both pedestrian and vehicular traffic. It's also worth noting that the project itself, by removing the parking lot, reduces, based on our engineers' estimates, the vehicular traffic by 80 to 90% on a daily basis. So removing a lot of that conflict just inherently by turning this into an open green space. Good. This is just one piece of the site accessibility improvements that we're considering or making part of this project. We're also making a much more generous and open connectivity to the existing accessible entrance at CAS and Sci. And then acknowledging that BU is making a commitment to rebuild that accessible ramp to Marsh Chapel so that this new landscape and this building are more accessible across campus wide. Another big part of the accessibility is the way we're thinking about topography. In our last meeting, there was some confusion about a 20-foot elevation on the plan, suggesting a 20-foot berm in the middle of the site. With an FFE of 17.5, which is just a little bit higher than the existing elevation of the parking lot, those 20-foot berms are really just a very subtle swelling of the landscape to hold some space, to create landscape rooms, and to create longer views out to the Charles River from this new campus quad. And the section here suggests in section how that subtle lifting of the landscape provides deeper views of the Charles River from this new quad, a quad that runs through different landscape rooms, the admissions plaza, an entry grove that's quite urban but also quite welcoming in the way that it's planted, a meadow that helps to bring people together for large events, and a woodland glade that provides opportunities for immersion in nature but also sort of outdoor classrooms and gathering spaces. That accessibility is also made possible by selection of materials and pavement types. We're bringing that admissions plaza across into the entrance of our space on the northeast corner. We're making a network of campus pathways from broom finished concrete that is, of course, safe, accessible, easy to maintain. It's also easy to replicate if this project does in fact launch a sort of series of future phases for future quad or for a larger quad at the heart of campus. And then suggesting that some of those outdoor rooms, like the entry grove, might reuse some of that admissions plaza pavements, but consider other colors as a way of animating the space and suggest settling in a way that feels a little bit more natural in terms of their tone. So we wanted to look a little bit more fine grain at some of these landscape rooms that we talked about. The landscape rooms are, of course, playing off the design ideas for the building, a building that's organized around living rooms and neighborhoods, geared to bring people together, not squirreling them into small rooms throughout the building. We think that the campus can provide a similar typology that brings people together at different scales and different typologies, but in the name of bringing that activity of the building out into campus. This is a view of that entry grove, and the reason we're bringing it here today, despite the fact that we saw these and we think they've done their job in terms of the sort of effect of it, it's really important to think about how these rooms and the way they come together bring people out into the landscape. There was a question last time about how the life and activity of or the ethos of the party school is reflected in the landscape, and is there a particular object that describes what's going on in the building. I don't think it's
Chris,
so
you're
much
about
an
halftime.
object, but thank you. But the way that it invites people to come together. This is the new front door, and this is where one of the most diverse student bodies on campus will now be brought in to bring those discussions that happen in the building around global issues out into an urban landscape and into an urban campus. So looking more closely at some of these rooms, this is a more intimately scaled room in the entry grove, one that's about 35 feet in diameter, but is huddled under the canopy of urban shade or shade trees that play off the character of the building with mottled bark that's expressive in the way that the building's facade is. Warm and accessible seating with additional accessible armrests that make this welcoming to all, and ADA companion seating adjacent to all benches, that this is again accessible and comfortable. And these sections just suggesting the sort of qualitative aspect of it, that it feels kind of like an open concept living room where there's partitions between them, but you can see, and they hold people together in a very welcoming and comfortable way under the canopy of trees. This is another example of a more intimately scaled room deeper in the site on the south side. This is a woodland glade, a sort of opening in the grove of trees and more layered planting. And suggesting here that those wood benches that bring people together in the entry grove are more like natural stone outcroppings within a more woodland setting. And then looking at a larger scale room, this is where we see sort of campus coming together, not just Pardee or CAS, but people from all over campus coming for a place to gather, a place for events, a shallow sloping lawn that looks out over BU Beach and out to the Charles River, a lawn that turns into a meadow in spring when, just like the Charles River Esplanade, daffodil bulbs emerge from them as a sort of ephemeral meadow, and a planted frame that holds the space but offers porosity, so it's of course safe and you can see through it, as safety is a very important issue on campus. And then just looking at it in a very diagrammatic section of that gently sloping lawn, looking at how that planted frame opens up to the forum of a very public, a very accessible, inclusive, and active first floor plan for the new Pardee school that Sean will take you through.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So moving on to the building that you saw in the background and its relationship to the landscape. One, obviously, we wanted it to be very opening, very welcome, and very kind of public at the front towards the admissions plaza, but also towards the new lawn and towards BU Beach itself. And so one of the things we wanted to walk through was just a little bit about those relationships that actually happened on the ground floor, specifically at the admissions plaza and the entry globe and kind of the sequence of actually coming into the site. One of the things that was important to us is that there was activity on the actual facade as you kind of moved around it, and it was very public and very opening for people to walk in through it. The other thing that we were doing is also we're using planting and landscape around certain areas to do two things. One, we obviously did wood studies for the building, and we're using strategically some landscape buffering here to actually make the more pleasant walkway into the covered entry of the lobby of the building. The other thing it does is actually create some nice areas for classrooms that are down at the bottom floor that actually activate the building as people are walking by, seeing the activities of the building from the admissions building, but with a little bit of privacy within that classroom through the landscape in order for them to actually teach and not be too distracted. The second part of it is that we have a covered entry that comes off of the entry grove into the entry plaza that brings you into the lobby. The lobby itself, we'll talk about in the second slide, but it's more about being a living room space. Everyone can walk into the open public lobby of the Pardee School of Global Studies. But the third thing, and the thing that's becoming very important, is that our active, healthy lifestyles, our abilities to bike, to walk, to work, and to be able to shower, to be able to change, to be able to have that transition from that healthy lifestyle to a work lifestyle. It's really important that the bike parking has access really closely, being even more than the minimum routes to the front door, as well as to the showers and the lockers and the changing rooms themselves. And so this is part of that kind of active lifestyle on the ground floor. And we wanted that facing all the different activities that are happening within the new acre of green space. We also have long-term secured parking, and this is actually for buildings, not only for the BU Party School Global Studies project, but for the CAS building, for Cy Hall, for for the School of Social Work. So all of this is trying to be centrally located, but at the same time, they have access straight to the lockers and showers, and also straight to the elevator lobby going up through the building. As we talked about before, the building's premise is a series of neighborhoods that have centralized living rooms that break down the scale of the tower. So as you're experiencing from the inside, the building to the tower, you feel like you're in that more kind of closer environment where people can actually collaborate and not get lost down long hallways and things that seem like a bigger building or a bigger office building itself. At the ground floor, we start with that living room. So as you kind of come in through the front entrance of the door, the first thing that you're actually encountered with is the living room of that space itself. The other thing is that right next to that living room, this is the access right off of the Leeds Wellness area, as well as the first classroom or the first collaborative space that's down in the lobby itself. From the living room, there's clear views into the elevator lobby, which brings you all the way up through the rest of the building. At the back areas, so against the party wall of Cy Hall and against the party wall of the adjacent buildings and the delivery lanes, this is where we place all of our mechanical and back of house spaces so that it's not facing any of the public areas itself. I would like to note there is no basement in this project. One, it's below the floodplain, so we wanted to breeze everything above the floodplain, which all these rooms are. But second, also, as in our pursuit pursue of embodied carbon, and thinking about that, digging into the ground, obviously, and doing concrete walls and concrete bases are a huge amount of carbon in any kind of project itself. So we have to fit everything on the first floor and up in the top of the tower and integrate it seamlessly into the design. So when you're in the actual living room
Sean,
space,
just a warning, you got about 2 minutes left.
Okay, let's go. So in the living room, you can see that from in here, you can actually look out with keeping the same materials from inside the living room out to the materials that Chris was talking about itself. The other thing that's happening is that we have all the different conversations that are happening high in the building. We're bringing down to the lobby so people have an understanding of what's happening and all the good work that the school is doing around the globe. From there, you have access into the elevators to move up the building. And one of the things that's important is that through the rest of the entire part of the project, every time you come out of the elevator lobby, the first thing that you're actually welcomed with is the living room. And this happens all the way up through the building itself. So the whole party, depending on which neighborhood you're in, is that you come out of the elevator lobby always sees the living room, and then you have a collaboration space or stair into the second part of this. But from here, you can always go back to the elevator lobby in here, and the experience is always same because it's centralized. So that happens in every living room as you go up the building, and in every neighborhood going up the building. The facade development itself, one of the things is that this is all about expressing the activities of the building and expressing the new ways that we can build today for creating healthier environments with mass timber. And so that becomes the expression of the building. But the other thing that's important is that we have the ability to also have some sort of thermal performance that's even above and beyond the clear glaze and that expresses the activities that are happening within the building. So we're having a triple glazing, but in the more private areas of the triple glazing, we're using Cepvar. Cepvar is this mesh that's actually laminated between the two outer pieces of glass that stops glare, but also stops solar heat gain. But at the same time, it gives privacy to the other spaces that are more private and not collaborative, which allows us to have a beautiful expression of all the kind of public moving around through the building inside the social network itself. With that extra screening, we could really push the envelope as far as how our triple glazing can perform. And we're actually meeting and targeting a EUI of 29.4 to have the most efficient enclosure and also the most efficient performance of triple glazing. This is taking a look at it down Bay State Road itself. The other thing is really for
And
this to be
gotta ask you to
successful.
finish up, please,
Yep.
Sean.
I'm on my last two. I'll finish up really quick. Is lighting is so important. And this is where we're at right now, is trying to understand the exact lighting of this collaboration network throughout the building at different times of day with Tillotson. So they have their own separate 3D modeling lighting studies that they're doing both mock-ups within and also doing the computational studies. What we're trying to do is actually get a real balance between having too little light where some of the network actually disappears for this at the wrong times of day, or having a little bit too much lights where it looks a little bit too animated and the lighting becomes the object instead of the people moving around through the building. So that's what we're working on today. So just as a summary, this is taking a look across the Charles River with the law school in the background as well. That, we, really trying to reduce the overall footprint of the building, but increase in density and add an acre open space. We're doing an 87% reduction in body carbon, and it's fossil fuel free. It's all electric. And as I mentioned before, the triple glazing is getting an EUI of about 29.4. So hopefully this is really about expressing the activities of the building as the architecture and then creating something else that is an aesthetic for the building.
Okay, thank you. And commissioners, before I turn it over, I forgot to mention that Diana Fernandez joins us ex officio commissioner tonight as well. Mimi.
Awesome. Well, I commissioners, looking forward to comments. I think we're a small group. I don't think we have to necessarily raise our hands, but and I really invite a conversation here, and really we can just have very targeted feedback so the team knows what to do when they return, either to full commission or subcommittee. And so with that, commissioners, comments.
Happy to jump in unless Diana wants to lead us off. Or...
No, go ahead, Kirk. I'll come after you.
Okay. Thank you. I think this is a really wonderful project, and I think there's a lot of great thought. I think the area that I'd love to hear more about or see some further study is the way the building meets the ground plane. And I think your night renderings are really telling. You don't need to bring it back up, but there's a lot of thought about how the building looks above 30 or 40 feet in terms of on the skyline, in terms of illumination. But the bottom 30 feet is dark. And in some ways, I think it has to do with the opacity on the side facing the park, where you have your lockers and showers. I think to a degree, I don't quite understand the way the classroom is treated so that one might see in or out from the classroom. And then lastly, how the building might grow out of the landscape. And I guess because it's a mass timber building, I so imagine this wonderful landscape meets this wonderful building, and somehow it's a really thoughtful transition that I haven't quite seen yet. The last comment I would make is I have some concern about passive surveillance and about the site lighting. And while I like the little rooms in the garden, I want to make sure this feels incredibly welcoming to the public, and that you don't worry about getting caught in that back catcher's mitt pocket up against the existing building and feel like, oh, gee, I'm not sure I feel comfortable going there. So in some places you have a very high tree canopy. In other places, it seems like a very dense, in some ways concerning place I may not want to be if no one is there, or if I can't see that someone is there. So those were the comments I had.
Diana, you want to follow?
Yeah, I'll follow up. It's
Yeah.
actually very aligned, I think, with some of the things that Kirk is identifying here. I wonder if, Sean, you could go to one of your site plans, because I felt like that may be the best way to kind of articulate my comments here. I do have to say that, Chris, I appreciate the development of the landscape. I think it feels more intentional. And Kirk, I agree with the safety concerns, but I think there's also something really lovely about the entry grove feeling like a real outdoor classroom or room. And I wonder if there are ways in which that can be further amplified through, like, this is sort of the next level of detail. Are there places to plug in? Or are there opportunities for students to sort of collaborate and spill out into the landscape in that entry grove? I also think that your grading strategy, I think when you had the plan that showed all the different elevations is really interesting to me because it speaks to this notion of the party building itself coming out of the landscape. And I think that's something, Kirk, you were mentioning as well. And I think you do that so well in that northern facade. And it just makes me wonder if there's a slight change to the approach of the bike parking that you have adjacent to that facade, and whether you allow the landscape itself to come right up against the building and sort of invert the placement of the bike parking as a means to kind of completing the part, like the party, right, for the concept of, this is a mass timber building that's literally coming out of the landscape in this really intentional way. And that you could also play, I know the grades are really challenging here, but I wonder if there's even further elevation on that northern facade that really emphasizes, that it's almost like the building is an outcropping, right, of the landscape expression itself. I will also say too that it also makes me wonder about the meadow and the lawn and whether there's sort of additional porosity or the aperture between the entry plaza is widened out a bit in order to sort of embrace that particular shift, because I think it makes more of that sort of plaza space open out into that particular landscape. But overall, I think I've really appreciated the development of the landscape. It feels really intentional. And I think making some of these subtle moves and playing with the topography, I think can allow this to work really well together. And then the last question I have for you is that pathway that is connecting to the locker rooms and the spaces where you can change after you park your bike. Where does that terminate? Is there how is that condition being treated? Is that something that, folks are going to be able to walk through? Is there fencing? Are people going to be in that loading dock area? I just, I recall my time in college where it was like, you would always cut through the loading docks because it was the fastest route. So being intentional about the realities, right, of how people are going to be navigating those spaces and how we make those safe and accessible might be something that, we continue to develop and understand further.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, you could see in the gray line here, right, between the kind of elevator lobby or the other entrance into the showers and lockers. And we can develop that to make sure that it looks and seems more intentional for that whole approach there. There is, glazing that's clear here for you to kind of make that transition. I do think also the thing that I love that you said and think that, would be really nice actually is that we were doing intentional with the landscape of the building kind of growing out of the landscape on in this north corner and giving, this kind of dual purpose of performance as well as kind of atmosphere inside of the building here. And I sort of like the idea that we would flip it so that it would be the same kind of continuous move here and it looks like it's growing out. And I also think we want to get natural light into these spaces, obviously not into the toilets, but they're on the other wall. But we want to get natural lights into these spaces, and these are the more private spaces that are behind the Sapphire. And I think that would answer, Kirk, what you were talking about as well, that the building continues to go everywhere and there's not a dark spot in this building, which I think is the right approach as well. I think these things are things that are definitely helpful. I do think that also we want to create this kind of condition that's in a meadow where that there is a kind of private part of it and then there's a very public part of it. And I think, the kind of placement of some of these edges, as you were talking about, could start to shift to make it a little bit more balanced and doesn't seem like you're getting cut off a little bit. And I think we definitely can push in that direction as well and make this better.
Just while you're at that back corner by the lockers, I just want to bring up one other point that I thought of just now while you were talking. I wonder if you couldn't flip the corridor to the exterior facade, given that all the opacity of all of the functions that are in the bathrooms and lockers and et cetera. It might be a way to get some light and transparency to that edge rather than have people walk on a double loaded corridor on the interior. Anyway,
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. And I think, the reason we we had a couple schemes and pushed back. But I think, because we were getting so squeezed with the program, that we had to fit these two guys in there. And in order to do that, when we push this across here and move this block over to there, we had to do another door from here and another door from there to create that corridor going down in that way. But let us push on that program, because I needed about 5 feet. And that's what kind of pushed me in the other direction. So, well, maybe we just light these from above, and it's beautiful kind of glow, like you're coming through channel glass or something in these spaces that are in the locker room. So they actually have some light as well. But having the corridor that way, walking along the landscape, would also give you, the motion of people moving through there, and a light all the way down to the ground, which would be a little bit lower. But if we bring the landscape up against there, I think that's a lot of me saying, let me look at it again, because it's been about 5 months since I looked at that particular flipping, Kirk, and see if I can do anything about that.
And I'd actually like to push a little further on this. I think this building is so fascinating. I really love what you've done in terms of the proportion of the tower, thinking about the articulation of the tower. I just would really challenge you to be less rigid in how the building meets the ground. How can the building extend into the landscape? How can you really push the idea of public and public access? When I look at that view of the entrance, it does not signal public to me. It actually looks like it's being a little bit more exclusionary. That entrance is small. So I would just really like to see, even thinking about the idea conceptually of an awning, like what are the ways that, again, the building and the landscape can become more integrated? And also in terms of the landscape, I think there's so many lovely aspects about it. I still would challenge you to look a little bit more closely at the proportion of the spaces. I think this was a comment that may have surfaced in the first review process of just what right now they all look pretty evenly proportioned, and it's not clear to me when I look at the plan on the screen what is public and what is not, or what's a classroom space. I appreciate the attention to the detailing, and I love the way that it feels very rich in terms of the landscape, but it's not clear to me in terms of like what might be an outdoor classroom versus a more intimate space. It looks very evenly distributed. So are there some ways that you can further amplify your intentions that you've described? Again, in terms of the scale of spaces within the landscape, and again, how the building itself extends into the landscape and the two become integrated. I love the idea of it, kind of the building growing out from the landscape, but again, it just meets the ground in a very kind of building as object way that I think does not do justice to your vision for the project.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of the tension, right? This is an object building, and I think it's a very handsome building. I'm super excited about the project. I think it's going to be an outstanding project for our city. So, these comments are only to help think about how it becomes even a better amenity and a better open space for our constituents. But you're packing so much into this footprint. So we completely get that is a constraint that you have. And the beauty is that it's an object building, but the ground floor is almost being constricted by the pureness of this volume. And I think that maybe what Anne Marie is getting at is there's something that maybe the pureness of it is actually a little too constrained. And I'll even push that into materiality. I really think that the glass wall that you described, the clear and the opaque, I don't know what you called it, is really beautiful. But I even wonder, does that really want to come to the ground? And I can see how you would want to because it's a pure material coming to the ground. But I just question, there's context here. This is an object building, but it is within the adjacency of the Psi, building and the, 236 building. I'm not sure what that is. And that those have a very different language. Is there a moment or like a water table detail or something to talk about the adjacency of the context that you're at? So you have both an object building at a distance that's beautiful, but yet it ties in somehow to the fabric of the campus, even in a small way. Something I would encourage you to think about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the primary goals and objective is that we have this mass timber core that we're carving into to create these public spaces and to express that, throughout the entire network, but also at the ground floor. And so one of the things is talking about different materials, and it changes a little bit when you get to the ground floor, is the intentional carving only at the moment at the ground floor into that wood surface. So you actually have the wood on the outside for the first time ever, when you carve into the building to create this vestibule and create this entrance without adding extra material to the composition itself. So you have this beautiful kind of, minimal material, minimal differences, and you carve in and you can touch the wood for the first time. And I think that's the moment we were really kind of looking for, to be that different opportunity at the base that doesn't happen anywhere else in the building, and why it was an intentional push in instead of a canopy out. But I agree with you. We wanted to have something different just at that ground floor, where it was a little bit more porous, a little bit more tactile, to touch what's happening inside.
But it feels almost, I love the building as it goes up, because that feeling rotates around the building. It feels like everybody gets invited until you get to the bottom. And now this place is for you. And one thought might be to rethink the expression of the mass timber and the glass when it meets at the bottom, that perhaps it's almost the glass wraps around the wood, as opposed to, meaning not the exterior of the wood, but behind the wood, or some other way that you express it growing out of the ground without undermining your intention of creating a special place. And that may be scale, much in the way you have these 2-story spaces as it goes up that denote, kind of really important places in the building. You can have that, but you may be able to have a lesser version of the warmth and the inviting nature of the building that as it meets the ground. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but that's a thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And or another approach that I've been advocating, to extend the building into the landscape. Can the landscape, move up and embrace the base of the building, to create that foundation? That I think there's sort of a intuitive reaction. I think that buildings should have kind of a strong base, and I just, from a frankly practical aspect, think about the role of kind of glass at the base. So is there a way that you can take the language of the limestone, that you're discussing for the landscape and the walkways, and have that create that water table, as Mimi suggested, for the base of the building? I think there is an opportunity for you to take this really beautiful idea of exposing that timber on the inside, and again, take it a step further. It feels like you are really constraining yourself by, again, the purity of this approach.
Can I add that while I agree with everything, that I wonder about the northeast corner. I think that's northeast, right? And
Where the classroom is, Kathy?
yeah. That rise on the inside creates a fortress-like quality that I think only contributes to the conundrum we're trying to undo here. So First, I wonder what the view of this building is from that northeast corner from the admissions office. And Sean, perhaps you showed a slide and I did not take a good look at that. Yeah, it was more the ground plane that I was hoping to better understand, but that's okay. It really, I just am finding that interior rise, which looks like it's part stair and part gathering space. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think just as a kind of refresher as far as the mass timber and the laws for mass timber and for going to be the first timber tower here in Boston, we expose 19% of the wood structure. And so these moves are very, if I steel and put wood down at the bottom for that area that I want to be a little bit more private for a classroom, but you see the activity through the SFR. If I expose that, I either have to do one, clad the whole room with fake wood everywhere and become faux timber for the structure that you expose there if I put cleared basing there. Or two, I have to steel and break the network someplace. And so it's this thing about really being, one, wanting to expose and express wood everywhere. We know we can, especially at the ground. And two, not building something that is faux when you can make it open and appealing without being faux. And but you can't go all the way. You can never go all the way, right? And so that's the battle I'm battling right now. Kathy, is like, if I steal from here, I have to take something away from there. And right now, those are the collaboration spaces that are 19% of they're 19% of the program and they're 19% of the surface area I'm dealing with. So then I have to like make a fake wood space that's not really a collaboration space. I don't want to be faux. This is the first like timber. I want to be so honest. So I know you see that constraint in the honesty, but I'm picking where it's most impactful.
Got you.
Yeah, but I mean, just to, we don't know the nuances of it's 19%, 20% or what it is. And so completely respect that that's something you're wrestling with. I think what we're just talking about is the context that you see in this image. You have the row house type buildings right next to it. And then, this building, which is going to be outstanding and gorgeous. Can there be a dialogue at the ground floor is really what we're asking, and how do you achieve all of your goals and yet be super respectful to the context that you're in. And so I think that's yeah.
And I wonder, Mimi, too, and I think Sean, we know how tight the numbers are here with your percentages, and really respect, I think, the balance and how genuinely you are trying to sort of express this building in its truest form. I think one of the key things here, I think that you're hearing from the commissioners is there an opportunity, right, to sort of interrogate that, like on how this hits the ground, right? And is there an opportunity for that warmth and porosity to make its way down further at that ground floor, understanding that we know that there's going to be a little bit of a push and pull, right, with some of the other spaces. And then I would also say that, and Mimi, this is my take on, I think, some of what I'm hearing. But I actually think that the landscape is a vehicle for the connection to the materiality of the adjacency of the row houses and the limestone and some of those stone materials. And I think, Chris, you started to allude to some of those materials, I think, in your presentation. But I think when you're back before the commission, there could be an opportunity to tie those things together a little bit more, right? What is some of the selection of the stone material itself, right, that is starting to speak to that? And also, as you're berming up, are there opportunities to introduce some of the stone material for seating, as you've shown it in some of your images, or also just, again, to kind of pay homage to that existing fabric? So I do think that it's a little bit of this sort of tinkering, right, with how does this express itself? And then I think, Sean, I know that you're pushing in for the entry. And I think as Anne Marie, you were kind of describing that entry and making it more open. it made me question a little bit whether the pushing is the right decision or whether you make it proud and have it come down purely and then make the doors more of, more open and unfortunately, you don't get to express the wood material there, I think, in the way that you imagined by pushing in, but there could be an opportunity for that door opening itself to feel, I think, grander in terms of how it opens back out into that landscape. So there may be some unique opportunities there to tinker with this expression. And I think it's similar, I think, to your diagram here on the right, Sean, where you're really thinking about that, forum space really taking hold.
Or could you also, yeah,
I
push in
just,
it
I
and
just,
pull
I just, I
out?
just don't want to put a pimple on this.
I think given what you have presented in terms of the overall building design, I don't think that's not what's in my mind as what it would be. It's sort of how do you extrude, how do you extrude out? And I think there's an opportunity to do something really extraordinary and to capture this as a design opportunity. And it's not, it could be trellis-like, it could be pulling. I think there are many opportunities to resolve this, to address some of the kind of the concerns and ideas that we're raising.
Just for my part, I want to be really careful to not try to design your building, but I do want to stress that given our purview of the impact of the building on the public realm and the trade-offs of the scale of the building and its location, a lot of that is quid pro quo for creating a very accessible, transparent ground plane where, not only in the landscape to invite people in, but also in terms of the building where it meets the landscape and being inviting or, illuminating the landscape, a sense of some of what happens in the building that you get going up, more of that happening. And I think that's why we're talking about that edge along the bike storage and the classroom. So, I don't want to design it for you, but I do think it is about speaking to the landscape and the landscape about being the public place that you're bringing people into this site. So that for me. So
Kirk, I'm glad you said that because one of the things that I was hearing both in the view from Bay State Road and when Sean was looking at it in the three sort of elevations was that, and the conversation earlier was really that if the landscape embraces it in a more robust way, right at the ground plane, it helps to all of the sapphire coated glass rooms really become engulfed in landscape. So where the building meets the ground is entirely landscaped in a very like a dense, almost woodland-like character. One that can be safe and porous, right? But one that has some gravitas to it. And the canopy is up high around the third floor so that you're seeing that entire, it's twofold, right? One is you're seeing the whole reveal of the amphitheater or the forum, sort of riding the topography of the landscape, but also then the building is meeting the ground at a smaller aperture from where the planting stops, right? So the entire expression of building at the ground plane is enter here. It's not, there's building all on three sides and then there's an opening over here. It's really a really nice, robust landscape at the ground plane that frames what is a very welcoming and generously scaled entrance. I think it's my job to make that more directional and more framing of the entryway that Sean has created that I think it can be really beautiful. So
Yeah, Chris, I think that's
think it's in my
spot
court.
on. I think that's totally spot on. And I'm glad that you chimed in with that observation because what is interesting about this building is how little, actually public space there is, even for the people that occupy this building. It's mostly mechanical space. And so how do we make the spaces that are really open and visible and entry points really such a focus and maybe through landscape, make the other ones just the rest of the building at the ground floor kind of go away. But in a very beautiful and intentional landscaped way. And by the way, I appreciate all the entry ramps to get up to this nice landscaped area. I noticed that you added one. I didn't want that to go unnoticed because I do think all those points of access to the open space are really important.
No, I think that's a great point, Mimi, because at the end of the day, it's either coming off that Marsh Chapel Plaza, which is now a wooden ramp down, switchback or left turn, that you're going to redo. I believe you're going to redo from what you said, or you're coming in off the street, where the Rotary is. I mean, those are the ways you really get people back here. So anything you can do to improve and message the beauty you're creating, I think is part of making that publicly accessible public realm.
Commissioners, are we ready to hear if there's any public comments?
No.
Okay, Sean, if you wouldn't mind stop sharing. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information. Okay, commissioners, I'm not seeing any raised hands, so we will close the public comment period and turn it back to commissioners for discussion of next steps.
I mean, I think the focus, I think, we saw you previously, we talked about, some landscape improvements. We talked about access. We talked about some road. We definitely talked about some, building issues that you have addressed in this presentation. I feel the project is so strong, and all we're asking is that 25 feet, from ground up, and the landscape around is really where we're asking you to think about in the next iteration. And I'm looking to the commissioners to ask you, would that, with planning department taking our comments and their own comments, guiding them, is that enough to get them to full commission? Do you think we need to see the project one more time? And so I'll pose that question and see what you all think.
I personally think they can get there. I would like them to come away with the robust statement that we're looking to see not only the landscape growing to the building, but also the transparency of the building in that 25 feet you speak of. And I personally think if it came again, we'd have the same comments. So I'm sure staff can help nurture this along from my perspective.
I'm a bit biased here because I am also the staff helping to advance this project, but putting on my landscape architectural hat as I am doing tonight, I think that it's going to be great. I think to see Chris come back with some additional evolution of the landscape character, it coming right up against the building in this really pure way. And then I think seeing Sean, what is possible with that ground floor, that entry portal, and ways in which to, I think, acknowledge our desire to open that up and celebrate it and its integration into the landscape. So to me, I think it's a really strong project, and I feel really confident this team can respond.
Yeah, I would say, there's so many wonderful things about this project and the spirit of advancing it. I'm really, confident in your ability to work with staff. I still want to challenge you to let go a little bit of that rigidness at the base, because I think you are constraining your own design opportunity. It is not, we're not asking you to just at, put an addendum, put that pimple on the building. I think it's what you're hearing from us is the potential to really do something extraordinary here. And I would just encourage you as you work with staff to bring to the table, you know, some different scenarios, you know, not just a small tweak, but to just explore that from a design standpoint, as we do as designers, to, you know, work towards that solution that we all look forward to seeing.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Kathy?
Agreed.
So what I'm hearing, commissioners, is that we are ready to send them back to full commission. There is some work to be done with the staff, some exploration that, you know, with Seth and Diana's guidance, hearing these comments, I think we think you can work on that with them, and we can see you at full commission.
Can I just add one more thing about, because I don't think we talk much about the rest of the landscape. I brought up some questions about, how welcoming this will be at 9 p.m. when there are 3 people, and so I think when you come back, if you could talk a bit about the transparency and the lighting and the tree canopy, but still not kind of eviscerate the kind of character of the rooms that you're creating in the park. So that would be helpful. And then the last thing I want to say, just because you've done such a masterful job of inviting us into the building on the upper levels, we're really just looking for you to invite us into the building on the ground plane. And I think there's a different effect of a building that throws light out at a landscape than a building that lets you see into it. And so as you think about how you make it accessible to us on that ground plane, it'd be helpful if you, like the corridor idea of, flip-flopping that at the lockers. I mean, just that throwing light onto the landscape that you're talking about creating might feel welcoming, as opposed to just putting some lights on the building that light up some bushes. So anyway, sorry, long-winded.
Okay, I think some great comments from commissioners and some very clear direction here. So hearing no additional comments at this time, and in lieu of a formal vote, it's my understanding that the proposed project is recommended for final consideration and a vote of recommendation pending the non-formal provisos, but the recommendations that you heard this evening. So thank you very much. Appreciate everything. Okay, Lizzie, can you please put up the next?
And Seth and commissioners, I do have to go, but it was a joy to be part of the review for the party.
Thank you, Diana.
That's great. Thank you for being with us, Diana. It's great to have you.
It. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. A proposed project at 185 West First Street in South Boston, seeking a notice of project change entitlement, contemplates increasing the proposed height and density of an approved project previously reviewed by BCDC and approved by the BPDA board back in 2014. This will be the third presentation of the proposed project to the Commission, following an introduction at the January 7th monthly meeting and a subsequent presentation to the Design Subcommittee on April 15th, attended by Commissioners Love, Manfredi, Lubenow, and Kim. This is a reminder to the proponent team that the presentations will be limited to 15 minutes. Planning Department staff will give you a halftime warning and a 1-minute warning. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready, and feel free to share your screen.
Great. I want to thank everybody for having us, all the commissioners and all the BPDA people. So let me just see if I can get this. Only one presenter, replace current. So I guess there's only one presenter at a time.
You
somebody
can replace the
already-
current, Peter.
Okay. Thank you, Seth. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
I am Peter Zagorianakis, and I have with me Antoine from my landscape design team, and I have Erica from my architectural team. My lead architect had a death in the family, so he will not be with us today. Run back. So this is the locus of the area. We're located within 5-minute walking distance to the convention center, the T station, and 10 minutes to the seaport. We've been through many, we started this process back up in summer of 23, and we've been through many meetings to get to this point, both with the BPDA, the neighbors, and now the BCDC. So we've heard many things during our travels. This is more isolated to the BCDC. So there was additional information that's been requested during this process, and I'm going to go through what's been said, and I'll show you the slides that answer what we did. So there was additional rendering showing how the massing and the scale related to the neighborhood and the streetscape. Everybody's wanted more information about our relationship with 186 West 2nd Street, shown in drawings and renderings. Of the relationship with 186 in our courtyard, which is behind 186 West 2nd Street. We've also done an hourly shadow study to show the impacts we have on the Mahoney Park next door to us. Requested sections for the sidewalks, more detail on the landscape plans, and then there was some confusion about private-public parklet and how it all ties to Mahoney Park. We've actually also got some design direction during this process. We've eliminated the false frames around the windows, which was requested, increased the width of the concrete sidewalk on C Street. We've increased that to 6 feet. Our relationship to the building and how it meets the ground, revised the height of the retail space to make it more inviting, enhance our entrances. The West 1st Street elements have seemed to be non-cohesive in our previous plans, and we've been requested to make changes to the massing while maintaining the parking that we've trying to maintain the parking which was promised to the neighborhood. And then the design changes on the actual changes. We've been requested to simplify the massing on C Street and West 1st Street. The articulation was not flowing and not cohesive. And then there's been several requests about the single-winged corridor, single-loaded corridor that was going too far towards 2nd Street, and been a request to reduce that or pull it back to create more open space and reduce the impact on 186 West 2nd Street and create a larger parklet. This is a massing diagram of the area itself, showing us in relationship to the existing buildings. This is the South Boston side. This is the Seaport side. And between between 1st and 2nd is the transition street between the South Boston neighborhood and the transition to the Seaport. The convention center is right here. This was a massing diagram where we were, this was where we were in March of 25. And since then, what we have done is we've pulled the building back approximately 30 feet on the parklet side. We've pulled the 5th story back on the park side as well, and we set back the 4th floor 10 feet to reduce the shadows impacting the park next door. And then we've increased the West 2nd Street front. We've pulled that back to try to gain some massing. And this is what the new massing looks like. It's opened up the complete wall of the 186 building. The parklet is now 1/3 bigger. You now have the same, we've done a shadow study, which is the shadow impact is now basically the exact same as our 2014 approved building. And we've had to do some other things. We've shifted the entranceway over slightly just so we can make the parking work and maintain the parking spaces that we have in the garage. This is our west elevation that faces the park, and it gives you more of an idea of how the changes have been affected from January till May. You can now see the entire building of the 186 West Second Street building. And the minimized elevation that faces the park. The diagram here is showing you trying to clarify the public and private use of the parklet we're proposing. So what we've done here is the first 25% of the parklet is open to public use and public accessibility with some bench area. And then the other 75% is used by the residents of the property itself. We also have a retail a seating area in our setback along the sidewalk on West First Street, and we have a dog relief area on West First Street as well as the bike share station. This is our landscape plan. There's been some changes, again, showing you the pocket park has now been changed so that you have a seating area in the front, and then the seating areas in the back, and the landscape area in the back are for the residents. And this is just showing you an enlargement of where it was in January of 25 versus where it is now, and bringing it back 31 feet and changing how it's being used, pulling the transformers off the street, so now they're camouflaged and further back. The seating area for the public in the front, and the seating areas for the residents in the rear of the parklet. This is a rendering showing that with the actual detail of the 186 building on the rendering. And this is what it looks like when we're across Second Street. This is another rendering showing a more close-up version of this, showing what the parklet will look like. The transition between Mahoney Park and our parklet is really with plantings. They're on the same elevation. We've drawn back the fence that is currently between the two properties. They have more plants than this rendering is showing on their side, but the transition is going to be basically the plantings are going to blend the park and our parklet together. This is a section of the West First Street streetscape, where we are comparing it to the building across the street. Across the street, they have a total sidewalk of 8 feet plus or minus. We have a frontage of 19.1 between the curb in the building, and we have a 4-foot tree well, an 8-foot clear concrete sidewalk, and then we have 6.5 feet of frontage along our building, which part will be landscaped and part will be seating area for one of our retail spaces.
And Peter, you're a little over halfway.
Okay. This is the same thing from C Street. And they're at 14.6 across the street. We're at 13.9, and we increased the sidewalk to 6 feet. And then along for a Second Street, across the streets at 10 feet, we're at 14.2. We have a 6-foot clear sidewalk, and then the plant area. We've got some sections and some renderings through the courtyard. These are the sections through the courtyard, so you can see the different views. There was some questions about how our parking area, which is right here, this is our parking level that you see from the courtyard, relates to the building in the middle here, the 186 building. And we've got plenty of space that separates the building and the 186 building. And this is a different view of the same courtyard. We're looking east here. And then we're looking southeast. This is for the streetscape along Second Street. Our 3rd floor is aligning with the 186 building height, and our 4th floor aligns with Park Square and the Signal Building, which is the two ends of the block and across the street from us on C Street. So we're currently aligning with the streetscape on West Second Street. Our 5th story is set back, so you don't see that unless you're further down the street. And this is a rendering looking at the corner with the buildings in play. This is the 4-story building across the street from us on Second Street. Park Square, which is West Square, which is a 4-story building across the street from us on C Street. Then a little further down the street, giving you a prospectus of how we blend in with the streetscape along West Second, looking west. We also did one looking east. Now, you don't really see our building until you're further down because this building is almost 90 feet set back. So what you see on this streetscape is the 186 building. We also did the streetscape along C Street. You have the 4-story building across the street from us. He's a little shorter than we are, about approximately 5 feet. And then across from C Street on West First Street, you have a proposed 75-foot commercial building that has been permitted that will be about 10 feet taller than us. We then did the renderings looking down C Street and how we fit in with the streetscape. And you can see at the end, you can see the convention center down at the end of the street. This is looking north. We also did it looking south. Now, one of the major changes we've made is the articulation of the C Street facade. We now have no bays. The bays do not come down to the first level. They are the second through the fourth level of the building. And we've also simplified the corner element of the corner of West and First Street, so that this element is now much simpler than it was. There was several comments that we had a big, small issue going on where the articulation in the project was small and then got larges and changed materials and then got small again, and it didn't really work. It wasn't coherent. So we've actually done 2 versions of this. We like the version with the metal in the corner, with lots of glass. We also have a second version of that I'll show you in a minute. We've also increased the height of the retail area by bringing our awnings up and by increasing the glass on the retail area. And we've also changed the grading on the sidewalk, so we're at grade with both C Street and First Street. So now it's much more user-friendly for the pedestrians around the building. This is the other option for the corner of West First and C Street, which is a brick version. We've also changed the articulation by adding some interior inset balconies along First Street. We also changed the entrance on the First Street side to simplify that and make that match the entrance on Second Street. It was a bit heavy. It had balconies above it. Seemed a little confusing. We've just simplified it. This is the version that we actually like, which is the metal on the corner matching the metal that's all around the mansard of the building and the bays of the building, as well as the entrance. And then looking down C Street from the opposite direction, what the building looks like from the park side. This is Mahoney Park, looking east on West First Street. And then looking down west, looking the opposite direction, west on West First Street. And now I'll just open it up for questions.
And commissioners, before you dive in, there was a request at the last subcommittee meeting regarding the proposed parklet. And Peter, maybe you could go to a site plan, please, that shows the site in relationship to Mahoney Park. And so we had planning staff consulted with Parks Department staff, that is a City of Boston park. And we confirmed again with them that they do not have an interest in expanding the park and receiving this site as either formally a part of that public park or as something that's physically connected to that park. They wanted this to remain as a separate, publicly accessible but private open space. And specifically, the challenges with connecting it to the park include the fact that the transformers, I think you can, I don't know, Peter, if those are here. Those are the little rectangles, but the transformers are almost on the property line.
Yep.
We're very close there in the front and are covered with a lot of greenery to shade them or to shield them. With that, we advise the proponent to not connect to the park, and the strategy of this public, fully publicly accessible versus resident only accessible is what the proponent is now proposing.
maybe I'll chime in and start there. I mean, I will say that there's a lot that you have done to address all of our comments, so I really appreciate that. I think I've been consistently on this project, so it's good to see how it has evolved. But maybe if we could go to a perspective image of that park. You had it on one of the slides. Yeah, this one. I think I understand the relationship between the adjacent park and this park. I feel like this is the weakest part of your project. You have addressed it being a separate, parcel. You put the seating area in the right spot. You pushed back the transformers and you've kind of covered them, but I still feel like it's really lacking of a design concept for the landscape. And so I would, I'm also even torn if that fence is there or not there because it kind of feels neither here nor neither there. And I feel like there's no real attitude. I certainly don't think, a couple of, understory plants are going to do the trick to separate the parks. So I just wonder if that should just be more intentional. And I'm going to leave that as a question for you all to think about, but I really think that this park needs to have an attitude, and I think it needs to have a stronger planting concept. I actually think the planning works, the programming of the park, has addressed some of the questions we've raised, but now it's really the choices that you're making in terms of material choices and planting choices. So I
Thank
will.
you. Thank you. Anton is our landscape architect. I'm just going to hold that for now and not comment, but we'll just take that into consideration, Ms. Love, and we'll try to get that improved. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say that the sidewalk sections were really helpful. I'm glad to see that. I think last time we were looking at 5 foot wide sidewalks, and now we're consistently, 6 and 8. So these are good dimensions. I'm glad to hear that you've talked, the height of the retail has increased because honestly, retail doesn't work if it's too low. And so I am curious what you raise the retail. We want to make sure it's successful and it will require a certain height. So if you can go to that perspective image.
Get a couple things. So the retail height floor to floor is 11 feet. And then what we also did was we brought the awnings up. So the awnings weren't part of the floor system. They were above the floor system now. So let me see if I have a better rendering of the going the wrong way. This one. So we brought we basically, we're now 11 feet floor to floor on the retail level. So since we didn't have the traditional 13 or 14 feet that retail is, we've taken the awning and raised the awning into the floor system above. So we're just below the windows on the first floor, second floor, depending on what you're calling it, from whether it's First Street or Second Street. And we brought the glass all the way floor to ceiling on the windows. So we've increased the look of the retail. And the retail, what we've also done is there is a change in grade in the sidewalk here. So we'll actually put a little retaining wall in this little corner, and this will be a landscape area. And then we will grade the sidewalk level with instead of it having a change of grade, this will go level with the sidewalk for the rest of the length of the building, so that it blends, so that you can have outdoor seating outside this retail area.
So I think what you have addressed in the architectural proportions is good, but I think you're going to have a functionality problem that I'm worried about. I just don't, retail doesn't really work when the floor to floor is 11 feet. And so I just want you to think about that a little bit more. Even if you gain a couple more feet, I think you're going to have more success with finding tenants than keeping the low ceilings. And so it's just something I just want to raise because I want to make sure that First Street is set up to, be a retail successful retail experience.
Yeah, what we've done, Ms. Love, we have a building on 8th Street further down this street where we have a similar condition. So we've come up with uses that fit our company, and we're using the retail. Because it's activating retail along First Street is still not mature yet. The maturity hasn't reached the market level. So there, we're actually putting in a commercial gym and putting our offices in that one, our retail office. So we will, if we have to, we'll activate this with other uses within our company as well, because we want to activate the retail. When we drive down both A Street and First Street, you see a lot of retail is still not activated that have used retail on the first level. So we're very conscious of that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry. Can we put up the C Street elevation? I'm sorry, C Street perspective, where you got both your neighbor across the street and you, if you don't mind. You had one that was a little closer in from the other. It may have been coming from the.
This one?
No, you have one. Is there another one?
This is the one from the corner.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for the
Second.
one that sort of looks down the block.
This is the one that looks down Second. Oh, sorry. Go slower. This goes down Second Street. You're looking at the Second Street side. And then this is the one that's looking down C Street. This is the 4-story that's across Second from us and West Square across C
Do you have
Street.
another one? Did you show us another one?
I have this going in the other direction.
Okay, I guess what I wanted to talk about was the street edge, and I wanted to talk about it in contrast to what's happening across the street where the openings meet the street. I'm assuming that's residential opposite you on the other side of the street as well, but your C Street elevation is more penetrations in a continuous wall, and I thought there was a rendering that showed that. All right, we can use this, it's fine. I guess my concern about activating C Street, and I understand you can't put any uses here that are active uses, but I wonder if, like your neighbor across the street, you can't engage Juliet balconies or other things that give more of a presence of both passive surveillance onto this side of C Street and also a sense of activity on this side. Because right now it's sort of one door, a bunch of punched openings, it looks like, and some of which have glass, and then this sort of elevated residential plinth kind of above the retail that goes the whole length of the street. To me, I'm just a little concerned if it activates the street enough, and if you could go back to your neighbor, the rendering that shows your neighbor a little. There you go. That's great. Yeah, this is what I was looking for. So, while the other side of the street isn't an active use, it does have really a sense of eyes on the street, a presence on the street. You're kind of elevated looking over the people, and that only gets a little more challenging as you go down the block. So that's probably my biggest concern, in addition to the things that Mimi raised, is how does this create a comfortable street edge and activate this side of C Street?
So just let me make a comment. His grading of this block there isn't much of a change in grade from Second Street to First Street. There is on this side of the street, but it isn't even as dramatic. We have an 8-foot grade change between the two sides, between Second and First Street. So that's why we have the garage on that level. Now, we could bring this down slightly, but what you're seeing is the garage wall. And in order to make the retail work along First Street, we didn't bring it down too much. So that's one of the considerations, but I understand what you're saying. We originally had planters here to blend. You know, we had a series of landscape walls stepping down the street. And several of the comments have been to go at grade with the street and use bigger plantings along the edge of our planting area to try to mask what's behind.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I'm getting at. It's not about masking, it's about activating. And, you know, there's no active use that you can
Yep.
really work with other than bringing perhaps a Juliet balcony kind of solution where people are more present or open their doors and, you know, with their screen door onto the little balconette or whatever. Anyway, you get the idea.
Yep,
I don't think whether you use planters or plants, it creates activation. I think one side of the street is inactive and one side is active, more active. So that's my biggest comment, in addition to Mimi. So I'll let my other commissioners
Thank you.
add. Thank you.
So maybe I should know this. So what I'm seeing in this elevation, those black rectangles, are those apertures to the garage?
Those are vents.
Those are vents.
Yes, we're gonna need ventilation for the garage. So we have vents on this side of the building, several vents on the other side of the building, and we actually have vents in our courtyard.
And
Yeah,
can you
that's-
describe what, I'm sorry, Mimi.
No, go ahead, Anne Marie.
What is the nature of those vents? You know, what will they look like?
They are usually gonna be closed grates. There'll be silver or black grates that are actually that can open. They open a certain amount of time, probably 10% of the time, to ventilate the garage.
And they're louvered?
They're louvered, yes.
Yeah, I just to build upon that comment, you know, is there, you know, how I just encourage you to look at the design of those apertures and the material that encloses them and consider them in terms of proportion and, you know, an opportunity for ornamentation.
Yep.
So that one doesn't, as a pedestrian, feel as if I'm walking past a service area. You
Yep.
know, what can you do to kind of bring the language of the building and the residential nature of the building down to the street? You know, just as, you know, Kurt was talking about the idea of, you know, Juliet balconies in his previous comment, you know, there are kind of, as you look through the history of particularly older, you know, apartment buildings, you know, of the previous century, in the early part of the 20th century, I think there's some potential precedents out there that could inform, you know, a contemporary interpretation. So it is less utilitarian, and there's an element of delight or beauty to the treatment of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Peter, if you go 2 slides up, you have a darker brick rendition, or I don't know, I'm on
Yeah,
a
we do in the
draft.
corner. We so on here. On First Street, the brick is a black brick or a darker brick. We did have a version that
see.
carried that along C Street and West Second Street as well. But we stop it at this corner, this line.
I
here.
see. So I have a draft where I guess I have the previous version.
Yeah, do you like the black brick better going around the base of the building?
Well, it does hide the louvers, and if one imagines Juliet balconies above that black zone, it might seem better in my opinion, but I'm looking at page 29 in case you all want to see the draft that I'm referring to. But I do think that, yeah, there you go. So that is just a darker, like obsidian brick or something, in that darker tone that could hide the louvers a bit more. And then if there's some kind of decorative railing or something,
Yep.
I think that could be an improvement.
And I would add, Mimi, that the lighting strategy, whether there's sconces or, I'm really quite concerned about a whole block that has no real access. You got to get, you don't want to sprint from one corner to the other. You really want to feel comfortable looking down the block
Sure.
and, looking over and seeing who's there from a cars going by and all that. So think about your lighting strategy and sconces and other approaches to not just making it go away, but making it activated as much as you can.
Yep.
And I do think that you offered us a choice between option 1 here and option 2 with that corner element. And I do think this one seems better, especially in relationship to the corner move that's happening outside of this picture across at West 2nd, I think was the name of that property. You had an image that I could see in one of your perspectives.
You
But
mean the corner facing
yeah,
the
yeah.
Mahoney Park?
Well,
Or-
here, this view. So there's a corner move anchoring both sides of the street that I think is stronger than option 1, which that move at the corner of 181 West First Street. There's an option where that doesn't happen. Am I correct? Peter? Am I reading this right?
So I'll go back to the other rendering that looks down the other way. Actually, they do have a corner element here on the opposite end of the West Square building.
But on the 2nd Street and C Street corner, you don't have an option that has that,
No,
Right.
that larger
we
bay.
originally,
It's just,
yeah,
it's this option. And then on the corner of First and C,
First.
you have the 2 options. And then I guess I was also bringing up that you have the bay expressed on the corner of the building that faces Mahoney Park. If you could bring up that perspective along First Street, because I think it's important to consider both of those corner expressions as well as, right, the center expression is of a similar family. Right there.
Is it right here?
Yep.
Yep. So we have both corners are the same on First Street. Yes.
Yeah. And then I think, to the commissioner's comments about the C Street frontage, right? There's also, and this has been talked about and discussed before, and we haven't, I think, hit yet on quite the right resolution, but the frontage along Mahoney Park itself, right, at the lower level too, and how that's articulated. So I wanted to link those 2 conversations, right, about the corner on both sides and the treatment of the base on both sides, because I think they're both very important. Mimi, sorry for interrupting.
No. I'm thinking and seeing if any of the commissioners have a comment. I think the corner move at, let me see if I get this right, First and C is more important than this corner move that I'm seeing here. But I also am not opposed to like the book ending of each block. But I feel like, it really just, in terms of identifying the corner at First and C, it's more important. I do know that we talked about the base on this side facing Mahoney Park. It's an unusual condition, right? Because it has that fencing along the way. And
Yes.
remind us of the program down there. Is that also garage?
So that is also garage, but that will be graded to the same grades as Mahoney Park. And Mahoney Park has a step grade starting at 25, then goes 23, 21, and then right about here, it makes a mad dash to 17. So that is graded higher throughout the entire park, and we're going to follow those grades. And then at the very end, for the last 30 or 40 feet, you're going to go from 21 to 17 grades. So you'll see less of that wall because the grading is stepped up along the park they have retaining wall blocks. And then we put, where this drops down, we put our garage vents.
I'll just say
And then
from a
this says-
material choice, I would keep it consistent with what you're doing on
Yep.
on C, and I think the darker brick is more successful, especially if you can integrate the louver
Yep.
into that. Commissioners, any other comments?
Not for me.
Then Seth, maybe we go to public comment.
Yes, Lizzie, if you could put up that screen. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I'll call on you. If you are calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep comments to 2 minutes. So commissioners, I am seeing hands. Valerie Burns. Lizzie, if you could. Yep. Valerie, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So my name's Valerie Burns. I'm a South Boston resident, and I'm a community gardener in Mahoney Park. And I have two comments. One is about the West 2nd Street parklet. And I'm not one to ever argue against park space, but I have to say that I don't understand the parklet, the relationship between the parklet and the park. I think it's a confusing design for the public, and it really sets up possible tension between public and private uses. And I don't see what tells the public that they have trespassed onto a private space, and when the two spaces look so much alike. So I really think the parklet at this point is unresolved, and I am really concerned about a conflict of uses, and I don't see what distinguishes the two. So I would really encourage some real thought to go into how the private space relates to the public space, and to make sure that the public is not confused and inadvertently trespasses. And so operationally, I don't understand it, and the look of it is very similar. The second comment I have is on the community garden in 2014. The shadows cast in 2014 were not on a public park with a community garden. You now have a public protected park owned by the city of Boston that has a large community garden that grows food for about 24 or 25 families in the neighborhood. And those shadows, while they may have been brought back to 2014, they really were never considered what the impact was in 2014 because the park and the garden weren't there. And I would like to see more effort made to bring more sunlight, which is critical for the continuation of the community garden, some more sunlight to come into the space. Those are my two comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Appreciate it. And let me see if there's any other public testimony. I do not see any at this time, so commissioners will close the public testimony period and start thinking about next thoughts and specific recommendations in addition to the ones that have already been made as the proponent continues to develop the scheme.
So commissioners, any thoughts? I do think that we focused a lot of the conversations on that, public-private park space. And so I think part of our recommendation was to really think about that space and have an attitude about it. And I do think I agree with the public comment that there is some confusing, narrative of how to use that space. And so to have an attitude, I think, is something that we're asking you to do, and to work with the BPDA staff on how to think about that space as a separate, distinct space from the adjacent Mahoney Park. And then I think we talked a lot about, the first 11 feet from the retail to all the way around particular C's and Mahoney Park elevations. But thoughts on where we should, I guess the thoughts are, did we give them enough information to work with the staff, or do we think that they need to come back and show us how they've taken our comments?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is there are some inherent limitations in the section of this project, and you raised one, which is successive retail, and you can push the awning up, but you can't raise the floor. The second is on C Street, where you can lengthen penetrations to try and make greater connectivity, but you can't create activity on the ground plane. So there are, either there are limitations that are feathering the edges, which staff can certainly do, or there are modifications to the section for the first 11 feet, as you stated, which require some greater clarity of thinking about the ground plane and what's possible with that. So I guess it depends on what the proponent's able to do, what the BPDA is able to do. I'm certainly comfortable with the latter if there are no modifications possible in the section of trying to develop a kit of parts that creates more transparency, visibility, and safety. But if it is possible to get additional section height, perhaps there are more meaningful changes that could create a more active public realm at the back of sidewalk. That's my thinking. I'm sorry.
Kathy, Anne Marie.
Well, I'm still uncomfortable with the park as presented, and I would defer to staff if they felt that they could offer guidance, but that as part of the overall scheme would come to the full commission, and I'd hate to find ourselves unhappy there for any reason, or not feeling that we fulfilled the concerns or suggestions this evening. So I'm leaning more toward at least seeing the park again. I don't think I can contribute as much to the architecture, but to me that just seems underdeveloped and confusing to the adjacent open space. So that I think that very public space, very public realm area needs some attention that makes more sense.
I think I would agree. I at first I do want to acknowledge the work the proponent has done to kind of expand our understanding of how this development fits within the broader context in terms of the renderings. It was really helpful for me to see that and understand the role that it plays in transitioning from one scale to another scale. If I recall correctly, going to the point about the outdoor space, when we left the prior meeting, we weren't sure, we didn't have a clear understanding of the relationship of this space to the adjoining public space. That has been clearly established by the city Parks Department. So with that in mind, I think it would be wise to go back to the design of the outdoor space that's within the purview of this development and think about, how it then clearly, because it seems to me, if I remember correctly, there was a fence before. It's a little ambiguous now. Then maybe the attitude, to borrow Mimi's comment, is to take the attitude that this is a very different space. This is for the purpose of the residents of this building, acknowledging that there is a public face that it presents to the street. And I think you've taken some steps to think about that. And is there perhaps an opportunity with that in mind to think about. It seems like the other piece that many of us are wrestling with, and I'm included, is the treatment of the basement of the base of the building. That a decision was made much earlier in the process to sort of set the first floor level of the residential area. There is more space than maybe in the neighboring buildings in the neighborhood that's taken up by service or parking. So that leaves you with a difficult condition to resolve architecturally in terms of how can it read as something that's more pleasant to walk by, that becomes part of the architecture of the building, as well as Kirk has raised, functionally. How do we, as a pedestrian, particularly walking in the evening, do I feel safe in that space? And I'd be curious, I know you've added some drawings that show adjoining context, but to really maybe better understand, maybe with some photographs, what's happening in that area, that ground. Seems like the ground plane is our topic, our focus of this evening. What's happening in that space in neighboring buildings that again might give you some cues to resolve the concerns that we're raising. I hope that makes sense.
I think that's helpful, and actually just made me think about, your basic amenities that would be part of a project of this size. Like, where is the bike parking? Could that be positioned where at least activates somewhat of C Street? And so I don't, we know it's going to mostly be a garage, but I do think there's some thought that you could give to activating that ground floor, especially along C.
And I think, again, I'd encourage you to look at precedents that, what opportunities, and again, I'm recollecting, Mimi's, your comment about preferring the darker base to the lighter base, because I've been scrolling through the draft presentation that was shared with us. And are there opportunities at a fairly minimal cost to look for ways of enlivening that space that also would kind of bring together the red brick and the gray, that you have of the bays? Is there some opportunity for a little bit of brick detailing or recessed panels, or things that again can begin to add a little bit of delight to what is a very functional base of this building?
So I think the good news is we've narrowed this to,
Exactly.
the ground plane and where it meets the building on 2 streets and the park. And, so we've given you some real clear guidance, and I think it should be, as Henry, I think you're really spot on. There's precedent to sample and go see and learn from. But, the majority of the building, I think, is okay in the way it has approached trying to generate housing. So, yeah, I concur with, I think we have concurrence that
Yes.
we'd like to see it again, right? So.
Yeah, I think I again, with that limited scope that you just described, Kirk, I think it would be wise to see it again. And I think Kathy raised an excellent point. I don't think we want to see a landscape without seeing it in full commission and not be able to support it. This is a team that's going to support your project through, and we can't be surprised. So great.
Okay.
If I could just
Thank
add
you for all your
another
comments.
comment, one more comment to that landscape design, that, how does that then become an amenity? Now that we've determined that it's separate, it's not, we don't want it to be an extension of the adjoining public space. How can it become a really rich amenity for your tenants, for the community that you are creating in this building? So how can it become an opportunity? Can it become more of a walled garden? So I don't feel exposed. If I want to use it, it's something I think about in outdoor spaces. How can I find a space where I feel a little bit of enclosure? Maybe I want to be outside, but I don't want to be, I want a sense of, semi-privacy. So I encourage you to think about that as a design opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent comment, Anne Marie, because I keep wrestling my head. Should that be walled off? Should it be fenced off? And I just, even that's another place where you could look at other parts of South Boston, I'm sure there's a condition or two that has something like this, and thinking about, you know, maybe it really is an amenity, and this is where grilling happens for your, you know, residents, and it's a beautiful garden for them to use. And so I do think thinking about it that way is probably, you know, excellent advice.
Or an outdoor space that if I want to, as a tenant, host a party, you know, an outdoor party, that it's something where my guests can enter through, you know, a gate or, you know, a passageway directly from the street rather than winding their way through the building.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for all your comments. They've been very helpful.
All right,
Okay, and
well,
hearing
thank
no
you.
additional comments at this time, and in lieu of a formal vote, it's my understanding that the project is recommended for additional review at Design Review Subcommittee. So with that, Peter and team, thank you so much. We really appreciate the development, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Planning department staff will be in touch very soon to continue that dialogue and advance the project along the commissioner's recommendations here.
Thank
And
you very much.
commissioners, thank you very much for your, as always, for your time and counsel.
Thank you.
We
All right,
will
thank
see you in a
you.
couple weeks.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you, everybody. Have a good
Everyone's-
evening.
All right.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.